Hello and welcome into another episode of Half Court Press, production of the Omaha World-Herald. He's Wilson Moore, I'm John Walker, and we're a couple of basketball boys.
We are, in the middle of it, in the thick of it all.
In the thick of it all now, because that's the life of a couple of basketball reporters in mid to late January, which is absolutely insane to say.
Yeah.
It's been a couple of weeks since we recorded.
It has been.
Shout out Dylan.
Yeah, Dylan showing up on the injury report last week.
We're glad that he's back now. Good to have you back. But it's been a couple of weeks. The last time that we talked to you guys, Nebraska had just lost to Iowa in overtime on the road.
In a game that they led by 15 in the second half. And if they had won that game, they would have been 3-1 in Big Ten play.
And Creighton had just lost to Marquette. They had that week off before going on the road to Hinkle to play a must-win/can't lose against Butler. Boy, how things have changed since then.
No kidding.
Because Nebraska has not won a game in the 2 weeks that we've recorded, since we've recorded. And Creighton has not lost a game in the 2 weeks since we've recorded. So it has been a really interesting week or two on each end of I-80.
Yeah.
Drastically different than where these two teams stood a month ago even.
Yeah. I mean, a month ago, 3 weeks ago. I mean, that was
3 weeks ago, yeah.
That was January 4th, looking at now, when Nebraska knocked off UCLA at Pinnacle Bank Arena.
Yeah.
That feels like many years ago.
A different team ago.
Yeah.
And it's kind of the same for Creighton in the exact opposite way.
Yeah.
Like, this is now not the team in any which way, shape, or form that there was pre-Christmas.
Yeah.
So it's been interesting. Again, Nebraska lost 5 in a row now.
Yeah.
Iowa, and then the 4 since we've recorded. And, Wilson, it has been heartbreaking fashion in
It has been.
a lot of those. Because I think, we talked a little bit beforehand. You said that last year's Nebraska team played some of its best ball in those last 4 minutes.
Yeah.
And that's why they were able to gut out so many of those games.
Yeah.
That has not happened this year.
No, it hasn't. And it's, you've seen that in games. Iowa, Rutgers, last night USC, to a certain extent Maryland, not quite as much.
Sure.
But especially those three came down to, final media timeout, it's now a 4-minute game. If you win the next 4 minutes, you win the game.
Yep.
And Nebraska has lost those last 4 minutes.
Tough.
Every time. Even the Maryland game, they came back down 9 with about, 5 or 6 minutes left and tied it up with a minute or two left and still just couldn't finish. And you think back to last year. I remember there was a moment in that Rutgers game. Bryce Williams had a look from 3 to tie it with about a minute left, and it missed. That's basketball.
Sure.
But I just remember I was sitting there. I was like, that's a shot that went down last year. That is Bryce from the wing again to take the lead against Michigan State with about 45 seconds left. That's Casey sealing it against Northwestern with about 10 seconds left. That's Rink Mast with about a minute left against Wisconsin. Those were shots Nebraska made last year, and they're shots that have missed this season. And look, there are a lot of reasons. I'm not trying to oversimplify this of that's the only reason Nebraska is on this losing streak.
But if you get to those last 4 minutes, no matter what's happened, in the 25 or 35 minutes prior, you can win the game.
Yeah.
If you are tied or within a bucket at the last media timeout, you can win the game.
Absolutely.
And that's the tough thing.
Yeah. And that's and I think that's, what haunts you if you're Nebraska.
Absolutely.
You're 2-6 in Big Ten play right now. That's in danger of missing the Big Ten tournament.
Because if anybody forgot, not all of them get in.
Not everyone gets in. 15 teams get in, which I think is dumb because why not just have 16
right.
get in? Wouldn't that make a lot more sense?
And then at that point, why not just have 18 get in?
Yeah, I don't know. But anyway, 15 get in, and Nebraska, look, I don't think Nebraska is going to go like 4-16 this year. That would just like, look, there's falling off, and there's like whatever that would be if they, like, because like this is a talented
Black
team.
hole.
You don't, I know, and Creighton's not the same team as they were a couple months ago. We'll get to that, but like you don't beat Creighton at home. You don't luck into that. You don't beat UCLA, even though UCLA was on a slide like that. You don't just stumble into those things. So that's why I think put aside the NCAA tournament for a second. We can talk about that if Nebraska rips off 5 wins in a row or something.
Yeah.
We can put that to the side for now and come back to it if it becomes relevant. But just from a Big Ten tournament perspective, I think they still win. But it really stings when you think about if you're Nebraska and you think you're 2-6 right now and you're a couple bounces away from being like 5-3.
Sure.
Sure.
Yeah. It's heartbreaking.
It is.
It really is. And it's been the complete opposite for Creighton, as we've already mentioned a little bit. Jays they split their first 2 conference games. They were sitting at 2-2, blown out at Georgetown to open Big East play, then came back, got Fedor Zugic cleared. Not that he played a huge factor or anything in that game, but got Fedor Zugic cleared the morning of the Villanova game. Withstanded a shot-making slugfest in that one, and then beat St. John's in a low-scoring slugfest 10 days later. And then lost at Marquette in a game that they felt like they should have won. We talked about that all on the last episode of Half Court Press, which you could find on your local and favorite podcast provider.
Your local podcast provider?
Go to your local podcast listening workplace. I don't know, like your local indie podcast place. And pluck Half Court Press out of the rack or into your ears or whatever.
Do we release these on like 45 records? Like, can you go and
we could. You want to start printing them? We could get that operation going.
Yeah, I think the OWH should be cool with that.
Sure. And if you bought a vinyl of the most recent episode of Half Court Press before this one, we talked about the Marquette and everything that happened through the first week of this year. And Creighton has really taken off ever since. They beat Butler in Hinkle in, again, what was kind of a must-win. Butler absolutely reeling, was on Skid Row at that point, still is. Yeah. And that was a loss now, especially that Butler is still on Skid Row, that Creighton could not afford to have. They didn't have it because they won 80-76 in Hinkle. Then they come back and blow out Providence. I think that was pretty indicative of what Providence is this year. Yeah. Like, they fought and fought and fought, but they're just not good enough without Bryce Hopkins. And then the big one, Wilson, because Creighton went to UConn, which, to be fair, without Liam McNeely, it's star freshman forward. Nonetheless, these are the back-to-back champs we're talking about. Yeah. And Creighton went to Stores in a juiced Gamble and beat UConn. 68-63 in a game that Jemiah Neal dropped a career-high 24 points. UConn kind of, as most teams do, and you especially know this from the Nebraska game in November, said, hey, if we take Ryan Kalkbrenner out of it and we take Stephen Ashworth out of it, we probably have a chance. And that's what they tried to do early, and Jemiah Neal made him pay for it. I think he had 17 in the first half, 17 of the 24. Ridiculous. And it was really important for those to come early because it silenced that arena. Like, if it was $2 beer day in Gamble, UConn had won 28 straight home games, and Creighton was coming to town. Yeah. And so it was rocking. Early, especially. And Jemiah Neal really silenced that, and then they said, oh, well, we probably can't let 5 get going, or more anyways. And so that kind of spread everything out. Then in the second half, they kind of put an emphasis on Jemiah, and Kalk got going, and Steven got going, and they were able to stand some punches down the stretch. Did you watch that game, particularly the end of it?
I watched the end. Yeah,
okay.
I think I caught like the last 10 minutes.
Was it a shooting foul?
Yes,
I think so.
It's
so tough because Hassan Diarra initiated the contact.
Yeah.
But Stephen Ashworth also didn't.
Yeah.
You know, he just like took the contact and didn't try and draw a charge or whatever. You know, if you're going to stand there and take it.
Yeah.
So I thought it was a shooting foul.
Yeah.
But it wasn't.
Yeah.
So it's kind of. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say I would like to see, not even necessarily on that play.
Sure.
But I tweeted something to this vein of just like, I would like to see refs call that more often.
Right.
Just because the state we're in with college basketball, teams can foul up 3 with no risk.
Yeah.
Like the offense has no way to counter
absolutely
being fouled up 3.
Inbound
and that
whistle.
Yeah, and like getting the shot up, that's a way to counter that, but refs never give it to them. If you've earned that, if you have timed that right, that you are getting the shot off as they're fouling, like you've earned that, and I would like to see that just because I think it makes more sense and just, to make teams make there be some risk in fouling up 3.
Yeah. And that's kind of where I stood on it too, is like maybe in a vacuum it was a toss-up, but that play was very indicative of what we see a lot in late game situations in college basketball now. And that's a little bit of what Dan Hurley said in his post game. He wasn't mad or anything.
Yeah. I mean, if you're trying to like draw on precedent, then that's on the floor.
Right.
Right.
So no, it's tough. It was probably a shooting foul.
Yeah.
Maybe once the rules committee emphasizes things this off season, maybe next year that's a shooting foul.
Yeah.
I don't know. But I thought in a vacuum, it probably was. But it doesn't matter because Creighton eked out a win at UConn, and that rematch will be in 3 weeks, which is nuts because that'll be the middle of February. Isn't that nuts to say?
That is nuts to say.
And then they blew out DePaul on Tuesday night.
As one does.
As one does. They did not play well. It's a good thing their defense, which helped them beat UConn, it's a good thing their defense traveled to DePaul because they, especially early, until again Jemiah Neal gave them a little bit of a spark, and created some separation. They did not play crazy well. Like Fedor, it was a game for Fedor Zugic to get extended run, and more importantly for guys like Jemiah, Kalk, Ashworth, for them to watch the last 10 minutes of that game from the bench. Like that was the most important part of a 24-point win at DePaul. Yeah. But yeah, man, it's nuts because just as Nebraska has free fallen to the bottom of the Big Ten, Creighton has risen to the top of the Big East.
It feels like this season Nebraska and Creighton are on one of those like, I was gonna say like a pulley system, but maybe more simple, like a teeter-totter. Only one can be up at a time.
Yeah. That's how it's been, because I don't know if at any point they were both just okay or like both good.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like when Nebraska was rolling early, obviously the non-conference schedules were vastly different.
Yeah.
But then the head-to-head thing happened, and then Creighton went and kind of fell apart in Vegas for a few days, and it was like, oh, okay. Yeah. And they're two entirely different teams from that point, in large part because of what's happened over the last 2 weeks.
Yeah.